welcome to Dear Katie, the podcast that amplifies courageous voices and real stories of resilience, healing, and hope after trauma. Inspired by the many letters Katie has received over the last 20 years, each week she interviews survivors, healers, and experts to honor their stories and explore the many paths to healing and hope. Before we begin, please know, many episodes of Dear Katie cover sensitive topics related to sexual violence, trauma, and recovery. Listen with care and take the space you need to take care of yourself. Your well-being is what matters most. Now, let's join Katie and today's guest for a conversation that matters.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Dear Katie podcast. As you know, I'm Katie Koestner, your host. And as we keep journeying along with each and every guest, I just implore all of you to keep that journal going or take notes and come back. I feel like every single time we all learn just something else that might be helpful, or we could give it a try or just a different way of thinking about things. And I'm certain Winnie is going to just wow all of you with her life experience and her writing and her everything. So let me share about our guest today. So Dr. Winnie M Li is an author, activist, and educator. She is a former filmmaker. Her life and career trajectory were severely disrupted at age 29. She became the victim of a violent stranger rape in Belfast, Northern Ireland. Her debut novel, Dark Chapter, came out in 2019, and it's a fictional reimagining of that assault and its aftermath from the perspectives of both the victim and the perpetrator. Her subsequent novels, one was called Complicit, out in 22, and What We Left Unsaid was just out in 25, also addressed the legacy of trauma in workplaces and in families. Winnie's PhD research at the London School of Economics explored the emotional labor of public rape survivors, and she's now an assistant professor of creative writing arts at the University of Birmingham, in the UK. Birmingham. Great. So welcome from the UK.
Yeah, thank you. We just flew back from Christmas, so it's kind of started snowing. So we're we're back in the UK. Winter time, yeah.
Yeah, we just had flurries outside too, Winnie, so I totally hear you. The winter's not my thing, but it's an excuse to find a warm, cozy blanket and read more books or write,
exactly.
as it might be. But I'm so delighted to host you, and your writing has been, I think, so powerful, but also the filmmaking and all the other things. So I always like to find out, where did you grow up, siblings, family, what was the beginning part of your life like?
So I grew up in North Jersey. I was, my family, I grew up predominantly in the Northeast. My family had kind of moved around. My parents emigrated from Taiwan to the United States. But my sister and I were born in the US. And I grew up in New Jersey for the most part, not far from New York City, and always wanted to write. From a really young age, I wanted to write. And was writing, I was writing lots of stories from the age of 6. At the same time, my mom, I'm sure, wanted me to become a doctor, but she still encouraged the writing. She just said, don't try to be a professional writer because you're going to struggle to earn an income. And that's just partly correct in that sense. But I always wanted to write. And I loved storytelling in all different kinds of forms, loved movies as well.
So that was kind of my what you were writing about at 6? Were you writing fiction, or were you writing about things that you saw outside, observations? What were you writing at such a young age?
Well, it was nothing amazing or ground shaking at the age of 6. I mean, on one hand, my mom made me keep a diary. So, and as a 6-year-old, there's not much that you're doing in your life, right? So it's we went to McDonald's today. So I was doing that. But then in terms of the stories I was writing, it was all leprechauns and dragons and that kind of stuff. So it was real kind of fantasy stuff and fun at the time. If I ever recorded any of them, if I went back, I'm sure when I read them now, I'd be embarrassed, but at the time it was just so much fun to kind of come up with stories and just to imagine all different kinds of worlds. So so from a really young age, I always wanted to be a writer.
I love that, Winnie. It's so refreshing. I feel like there's either those who know their lane and they want to be in it and they know it from when they're born, and then some of the they're trying a zillion things and they're never landing on one, but somehow they traipse along on the right stones across the river and get to the other side. So very fun. Did you go? You went to public high school. Did you go to college in the U.S. or elsewhere?
Yeah, I went to college in the U.S. So I was lucky in that my mom, raised me, and I always had a strong emphasis on education. So, I did quite well at school. I went to Harvard for my undergraduate. So, there's a lot of privilege that comes with that. But I studied folklore and mythology when I got there, specifically Celtic, because I'd kind of developed this fascination with Ireland and Scotland. And that's, the bizarre thing as a Taiwanese American kid growing up in the States, just being like obsessed with this other part of the world, right? That was so different from my own upbringing. So I always wanted to travel to Ireland and Scotland, and then ended up getting a fellowship to study literature in Ireland
Oh,
after I graduated. So,
perfect.
yeah.
Okay. So how long? So you're done, and you're about 21 with Harvard,
Yeah.
and then how long is a fellowship? Is that a couple years or a long time?
It was just 1 year
1
long.
year.
Yeah. So it was the George Mitchell Fellowship. And so it's for 1 year of postgraduate study in Ireland. But, it was, I was overjoyed. I was like, oh my God, I'm going to Ireland, right, to study. And so I ended up studying English. And so I was mainly looking at gender and sexuality in Irish writing. So predominantly Irish women writers. In Ireland was different from what I was expecting. I think when you dream about a place and when you get there, it's always like a little bit different from what you expect. As a person of
Where when you say different, was it, there's definitely plenty of stereotypes in all the movies.
yeah,
It's like they have the same music, the same landscape scenes, the same like
yeah,
crescending waves on the rugged shore and the golf courses, right?
yeah, yeah.
So we have like the ultimate, and then the cheers and dancing. It's such a
Yeah.
well, it's reality.
Well, that is part of Ireland. Like Ireland does have all that landscape. It does have this, great beer, like big drinking culture. It does have like that, the Irish traditional music, which you can hear in pubs, every Thursday or whatever, right?
Oh,
Depending on the
fun.
pub.
Like,
So it does have all of that.
okay.
I think what was different for me was as a person of color, like going to Ireland, I wasn't really obviously expecting, because I was 20, 21 at the time. I wasn't expecting. I was a bit older. Yeah, 21, 22. I wasn't expecting that like people would be reacting differently to me, literally based on how I looked, right? So there was a big kind of general like surprise I spoke English so well, right? when I moved to Ireland, because they were like, oh, why do you speak English so well, and with an American accent? Because I think when Irish people think of America, they don't think of someone who looks like me, right? So, obviously America is, really racially diverse, but they're thinking of all the American movies they see, right?
Right.
So there was a general surprise that I spoke English so well, and and just a sort of way I was treated was sometimes, it wasn't overtly racist, but there was like sexualized kind of like comments towards me as a Chinese woman. So that was there. But it was also, but by and large, people were also friendly once you got over that initial like shock of why are you speaking English so well. So it was kind of, so that's some of it. And some of it's also just, I moved to Ireland in 2001, and, email was still like quite new for people in Ireland, so the ways of communicating between the way Irish people communicate and the way American people communicate is quite different. So there are all those kinds of things that happen when you move to a new culture. So yeah, but I also loved it at the same time. So
You're only there a year, and then do you come back and continue school here in the U.S.?
No, I actually have never moved back to the States since I left, right? Yeah, and so that wasn't entirely intentional. But I was in Ireland, and then every time I traveled to London, I was like, this is an amazing city, right? Like I couldn't imagine myself necessarily living in Ireland as my out of like deliberate choice if you could pick anywhere in the world, but I would pick London. So I decided, I was like, I'm going to live in London, right? And so when I was in Ireland, I started volunteering for a local film festival where I lived in Cork, and then I made contacts with different filmmakers in London. And then when I traveled through London, I was like, I met up with some of them, and I said, yeah, I'd be interested in working in the film industry. And one woman said, I'll put you in touch with a producer whom I know. And that producer was looking for an assistant. So I was like, you know what, I'm just going to move to London and see what happens, right? So I did that in 2002, and haven't moved back, right? And I don't live in London anymore, but I started interning and then eventually finally got paid to work in the film industry in London. And I love that city, and I still do. I don't live in London anymore, but yeah, that was, I think it was just a matter of like finding a city that I adored living in. So yeah.
Perfect. And and it sounds like luck was, with you to find those positions so quickly and fortuitously, to stay and, at a place you loved. And you're at that point, are you single? You're dating? You're like, what's the whole relationship world look like?
Oh God. I mean, like, I still haven't figured that out. But no, single and, dating bits, but, never successfully, right? I mean, I had a college boyfriend that I was quite serious with. We broke up when I moved. I mean, I broke up with him when I moved to Ireland because I think for me, I've always wanted to travel, and I kind of, I don't know, part of me was more interested in traveling than in it sounds cruel at the time, but then in like, making every opportunity to see my boyfriend, right?
Right.
So, and he's a great guy and everything, but I just wanted to see the world more. So, when I moved to London, I think I tried, I mean, I went on lots of dates, but it wasn't like super successful in a lot of ways. Like, I have a lot of stories, but there wasn't any like one lasting relationship from that era. And there was a lot of heartbreak to some extent at the time about it. Now looking back at it, I'm just like, well, maybe it was for the better because I got really invested in my career. I got really invested into like all the things that London had to offer. And part of me does think if I'd been in a relationship at the time, like a really serious one, I would have had less time to kind of explore, right? So a lot of my life has always just been about exploring the opportunities that come to you, and less so romantic opportunities because I haven't really worked out, but like the intellectual and the cultural and like the life opportunities have been kind of great.
It strikes me when you just listening to you and like knowing where we're going to head in the conversation and having read your bio. I really like what you just said about you take the opportunities that come to you and just move forward with them. And so instead, again, it kind of goes back to like that metaphor I just made of like stepping across and finding the right stones. But I like getting our listeners also to thinking about that is instead of saying, I must do this, and I think this is, it's also really amazing when you can just take and because one thing leads to another, to another, to another. And the more you open yourself wide to real breathing, like in-person experiences, online, of course, but I still think it's like great to go out there and talk and meet and walk and, do this stuff. And it sounds like you were doing many, many things beyond film. Were you doing, like what other kinds of activities were you doing? Were you studying as well? Or mostly just in the film world?
Well, I was doing a whole bunch of stuff like, and I wasn't studying at the time when I first moved to London, but, I've always loved traveling, right? And so when I was in college in the States, I started writing for a travel guidebook. So that was kind of, just like, I'm sorry. Just somebody steps in the room. Okay, so we'll cut that out. Yeah. So I've always loved traveling. So I was writing for a travel guidebook when I was an undergraduate, and that was kind of sort of trial by fire. They were like, "Oh, okay, we're going to send you to Germany for 2 months, right? Just travel around on your own and make sure you visit these like." These 30 cities in like 2 months kind of thing, right? It was probably more like 45 cities. So, I just started learning German like 3 months earlier. So it was this kind of like real trial by fire where it's just like you figure out how to survive in a foreign country, right? And so in some ways it's scary to think about, but then I just got such a thrill from it. Like I'm slight adrenaline junkie, but not to the point where I'm going to be like, bungee jumping off of planes, but like just the thrill of just going to a foreign country and having to rely on my own wits to figure everything out is great, right?
I love that, Winnie. I love also that you're a single woman doing it and you're pretty fearless.
Yeah. And so that was kind of my motto for a long period of time, into my 20s. And so I loved traveling, when I was in London. Again, another reason I wanted to live in the UK is you can just hop on a cheap flight and be in Spain for a weekend or something like that, right? The amount of traveling you can do from here or from the UK when you're in Europe is incredible. So I kind of loved all of that, So I was working in film, doing lots of, film screenings. A film I'd worked on had been nominated for an Oscar as a short film, so I got to go to the Oscars. Speaking, going to different film festivals. So that was all really exciting. But then also I was in London, so you could see like world-class theater and like art exhibits, like 5 of them in a day if you wanted, right? And it was great, right? And yeah, I mean, anybody who's, for the most part, most foreigners who've lived in London in their 20s will be like, that's a great city. Because it is. It's expensive. It's kind of a crazy city. It's brutal in some ways. The first 6 months I lived there, I didn't really have any friends, right? And that was tough, but, I could go to amazing art exhibits, so it was like that sort of balance each other out. And then eventually you do carve out your own social life. So yeah.
So you're there doing all this, and then I think we should definitely talk about age 29.
Yeah.
So how did you? I mean, now I'm kind of thinking you're independent, you're pretty fearless, you're accomplished already, trying everything on. So take us to where at Northern Ireland and all that happened, and what that story was like.
So yeah, and then that whole life I've just described, it sort of like changed like that in the space of an afternoon when I was 29. So it was the second Saturday in April in 2017. And so I said I'd been a George Mitchell Fellow, so it was an American fellowship to study in Ireland. And so every once in a while they'd have these reunions, they'd invite the George Mitchell scholars or the previous ones back to different events in Ireland. So I got invited to something that was meant to be like, it was the 10th anniversary celebration of the Good Friday Agreement in Northern Ireland. So obviously Northern Ireland having its own history of violence, kind of the beginning of the peace process would have been 1998. So in 2008, they had the 10th anniversary kind of event, which I was invited to, and it was kind of like gala dinner and like televised like symposium, and I was just mainly in the audience and kind of invited to stuff, and so it was kind of interesting to go back to Ireland, but then at the same time, again, as somebody who travels a lot, every time I'm go to a city for work, I always want to like stay on for another day and like explore the city, right? And I love the outdoors as well, so I'll always try to, if I'm in the right kind of place, I'll try to do a hike, right? So there was a hike that was described in my Lonely Planet Walking in Ireland book, which was started on the outskirts of Belfast. So I did all that kind of, the events I just described, I did that kind of stuff. And I set aside like a Saturday to do this hike, starting in the west of Belfast. And the next day on Sunday, I had to fly back to London, and it was the red carpet premiere of a film that I'd worked on in Leicester Square, like in the middle of London. So it was this big red carpet premiere. It was like our first one. I was really excited for that, but I was like, I'm going to just take this day and go on this hike in Ireland. So I started going on this hike, and it was, Belfast is not the easiest city to navigate if you don't know it that well. Also, the Northern Irish accent quite thick. But anyway, I figured out how to get to the city park where I had to start the hike. And it was a 10-mile hike that was going to start in the city park and go through the hills and finish north of the city. And so it was a beautiful spring day, started on the hike. And then about like 20 minutes into my walk, I was approached by a young man who seemed a little bit strange. And then he asked me for directions. And I tried to help him, but I was just like, why is he asking me for directions? I'm clearly not from here. But his behavior was a little bit odd, but, I didn't want to be rude. So I tried to help him. And then he kept on sort of tagging along, trying to have a conversation with me. And after a while, I was like, why is this kid tagging along? Like, this is kind of annoying, right? And he was really young, so it didn't strike me as like a dangerous situation just because he was so young, and he just was like more annoying than anything. And I was trying to be polite and kind of like shake him off my tail. And then eventually I kind of was like, oh, I have to make a phone call to a friend kind of thing, right? Just like making up that excuse, which I'm sure lots of women have done in various situations. So I tried making a call to a friend at the time. Obviously, there wasn't even any cell phone signal where I was by that point. But I just like did a fake phone call, right? And thought I'd kind of lost him. And so by that point, the city park we'd been walking in had sort of it was more into the countryside and there weren't so many people around. So I continued on my walk. And that metaphor you came up with of kind of like crossing the path, crossing the stream is an interesting one, because I have this very clear memory of trying to cross a stream, which was described in my guidebook. I was trying to cross the stream, and then this kid shows up, right? The one I'd been trying to shake off my tail, who I thought I'd lost, was like, oh yeah, well, I know how to cross the stream and just go there, there, and there. I'm like, what's this kid doing here again? And then I'm like, he was lost. So if he said he was lost, why does it seem like he knows this place now? So there were kind of like red flags, at that point for me, but I was also in the middle of nowhere at this point. And so I had two options, which was to keep on walking or to like turn around and go back to where I was going. And regardless, at that point, I was the only person there, in a pretty remote area. So it was just me and him. So I kept on walking because I was just like, I don't, I mean, I don't know what this kid is up to, but like I came out here to do a hike. So I've always been like relatively single-minded in my life. So I was like, I'm doing this hike, right, regardless of what this kid is gonna do, or regardless of like,
I love that part of you. I'm like, I can see you. You're so feisty. I love it.
So, and at this point, like, I somehow, that second time he approached me, I somehow managed to like, get away from him because I was like, listen, I'm going on this hike, all right? And he's like, oh, wait, I can go with you. I'm like, no, I came here to be on my own, right? Maybe not the best thing. So I don't know, right?
Right.
So I kept on walking, and this is described at the beginning of my novel, right? So if you read the beginning of my novel, this is kind of where it picks up, where it's just like I'm climbing up this hillside, trying to get to the path which continues at the top of this ridge. I get to the ridge, I think I'm on my own, and I have this amazing view of like the west of Belfast. There's like a waterfall in the distance. So it was this kind of sense of I finally escaped the city, and like, okay, now this hike is really beginning. And I look down the path, I look down the slope I've just climbed up, and I could still see him following me.
Oh,
So at that moment, I'm like, okay, I'm in trouble, right? Because there's this
yeah.
kid who knows I don't want to be with him, but he's clearly following me. I
Right.
don't know him. I don't know the area I'm in. Like, just get the hell out of here, right? So I like was picking up the pace, and eventually I started running, right? And then I came out into a clearing, and then obviously this kid was still following me, and he came out into the clearing, and I was like, listen, what do you want? And he's like, still kind of like, at this point, I mean, I think he was quite high on drugs, but he wasn't making any sense what he was saying. And then he says, do you like having sex outdoors? And I'm like, no. And I'm like, no, and certainly not with you. And I went to walk past him because at that point I could hear a busy road somewhere in the distance, or I thought it was busy. So I'm like, all right, just get to the busy road. And I was like, no, definitely not with you. And then he just like flipped a switch and became incredibly violent. So it suddenly went from like this bizarre situation to like, oh, I'm being attacked by this person who I don't know what the hell they're going to do, but they probably, are going to, rape
Oh my
me, right? So it was a pretty, and then you're in survival mode. And so I was like, I don't know what the heck is going on, right? And so I'm kind of, and that thing, that thing that you don't want, that you hear about, rape, which I'd never been exposed to really in my life before, is like, oh, is this going to happen, right? So it was this very kind of, it's like having to think on your feet and having to be like, what's the best way to survive this situation? And then, he's demanding all this stuff. And so it was kind of, there was a physical struggle. And during the course of that struggle, I'm like, this kid is really violent and I'm going to die if I keep fighting him, right?
God.
And he also clearly knows how to fight, right? Because he was, he bent my fingers back and like he punched me in the throat, and he was saying all this stuff, like he was like grabbing a rock into like, I'm going to smash your head in, I'm going to slit your throat. So it was just, for me, like this sudden switch from like, here's an annoying kid who's like trying to chat to me, to like, oh no, he's violent and he's going to kill me, and he's going to kill me if he doesn't get what he's asking for. I was just like, okay, like I tried fighting with him. I remember like slipping, and I was on the ground, and then he's like choking me, and I'm like, I can't breathe, and that's terrifying, right? If you've never been in that situation, to like not be able to breathe, because suddenly you're like, I'm actually going to die. And then having to switch my like strategy and be like, okay, just give him whatever he wants, right? So eventually, obviously he wanted sex, right? So it became that, it became like, what is the fastest way to get out of the situation with the least amount of damage to myself and not die, right? So so it became a quite protracted assault, because so at one point it was a very clear decision on my end to be like, just give him what he wants, right, and get out of here alive. And and so he wanted all these different positions, and like it was like ridiculous. It was like he'd seen a porn film and suddenly wanted every single position he'd seen in the porn film, and me trying to kind of placate him because that was the best way to not die, or the surest path to not die. And you still don't know this individual, so you don't know what he's capable of afterwards. But like trying to think, if I give him what he wants sexually, then hopefully he's going to be less violent and less physically damaging to me. So yeah, and it was a rational thought process throughout. It was kind of, that's like survival instinct, right? But it was still at the time during the assault, I wasn't thinking like this was rape. I was just thinking like, just get out of this alive. And then afterwards, and I think it was probably about 20. It felt quite long, but it was probably about 20 minutes, right? Because there was nobody else around. So it was just kind of like you went to this position, that position, and like it was like muddy. It was a completely bizarre, surreal thing to have happen to you. And I just remember thinking at one point, like I'm on the ground and I'm like, what happens if some walker comes around, some person on a hike, and he thinks that we're just like a couple having sex right in the forest? And I like, do I mouth to them like I'm being attacked? Like I don't want this. That never happened. And so eventually it just sort of petered out, right?
I just want to stop and say thank you. I mean, that was a lot to talk about. And I know as a fellow survivor, it just is right there, right? So I want to give you like big strength.
Thank you.
Some water. And I guess one of the things that, like the dialogue you were having internally, I did that with I know that's how I was dealing with what was happening in the moment for how many minutes, the same thing. It's like, it was such a turnaround. Like the way you described, here was this annoying kid, and then here's this violence. And it makes me think of a couple things. Like one is the way your brain was going through all of this operation and staying intact and analytical is really fascinating. And like, I'm glad you shared it the way you did, because I don't think like that makes me understand you, because I'm like the same, but I don't know that I've heard many other survivors describe how they were navigating it in their mind as well. Like, thank you so much for taking the time. Because it's unfathomable, like our bodies are being done to us, and then not knowing what is exactly next or how long or all the million things. Can anyone hear me down the hall in the residence hall? Like, can anyone hear me? Like, it was a zillion, almost the same bazillion battery of thoughts. Like, I didn't even know how to say it. Like, I would say you just gave us 10, but I would guess your brain was going through 100 things all at once. It was like over processing everything just to stay, like, think through every possible math problem solution, right? You know what I mean? It's like that there's only, or maybe with your film, it's like you're seeing it and then you're playing out all the possibilities at the moment. And I think it's really hard for most people and even other survivors to like sit in that moment of ultra panic, but yet think about how amazingly awesome you were in that moment. It's like incredible. Like, I just think people could never, it's like running a marathon fivefold and Olympic champions of like survivorship, you know, Navy SEAL or whatever. Like, I hate to say it, but I think you just did it so well that it's just beyond belief for most people to understand the heroics involved with survivorship in the moment. So thank you. Thanks for doing that, because it just it makes me sad and happy. It's the weirdest little thing, but because you did it so brilliantly, and I hope people get that. I hope they understand like how brilliant you were in the moment of ultimate degradation. Right? It's hard to
well, thank you.
I don't know if I said it that well, but I just wanted to explain that the way your brain was doing all those things was genius. Right? You know?
Thank you. And I guess no one's ever said it to me that way. I mean, I've never really, I think it varies because I've told the story lots. But this is probably the most detail I've given in a while. Partly because I know this is Survivor's podcast and kind of everyone, a lot of people can sort of relate to some aspect of my situation here. And maybe also I feel like the safest talking to you because I know, you
when you were like 16 years old, which we didn't tell the audience yet.
So we have to talk about, but like, again, and so should I talk about it now? So, when I was in high school, when I was 16, I think, but some point in my high school, so I went to Wayne Valley Public High School in New Jersey. Katie, you came and spoke to my high school, right?
Well, great.
And
it was, I'm so proud of you, Winnie, because it was like maybe the way I told my story like zaps back into your head. And
Well, I mean, yeah.
you know,
Yeah, I mean, it was on some level because when the first time when I heard your story, and I was a kid, right, and it was the first time I'd heard anyone really speak lucidly about their own experience of rape, right. So obviously, growing up in our society, like you hear of rape a lot, it's in TV shows, it's like whispered about and all this, there's this inherent fear of rape that you have growing up as a woman or a girl in this society. And so, Kate, you spoke, and I was like, this is a woman actually talking about her rape in a way that where she wasn't ashamed.
mm-mm.
And she spoke about it in a really matter of fact way in a scenario that, certainly back then we weren't seeing a lot in the media.
No movies.
Date rape with a guy.
Not really.
Yeah.
And not even
Yeah.
today. Like, I think the other thing I would just point out, Winnie, is like I feel like the way you and I, when people hear me too, I feel like I still want to you're in film. So I'm like, when are we going to get a better film to help portray like how nuanced it all is? It just boils down to this stupid, like, show these body parts and show the face this way and show the eyes crinkling. And it's just a 5 dumb things that don't even represent what we're going through.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I'm like, when are we going to do this better? What year is this?
Yeah, and it's tough. And like, I saw a brilliant film on the plane over about the aftermath, right? Called Sorry Baby. It came out last year. It's a small independent film written, directed, starring Ava Victor, and it's just basically about her a few years after an assault. But like really, really beautifully done and quite funny at the same time. But I've never seen, and I think is it almost impossible to capture in film the actual experience, right? And so in my book, obviously, I don't know if you've gotten to that, the assault scene.
Everyone, look, you must get Winnie's book right here.
So in my first book, that was, for me, the challenge was like, how do I capture the assault itself in a realistic way? But I'm also telling the viewpoint of both the victim and the perpetrator, so I kind of have to like bring both of those viewpoints together in the assault scene. And I've written the screenplay adaptation of my book, so again, there's an assault scene there. It's like, how do I show this in a way that isn't demeaning, it's not sensationalistic, and is also true to the experience? But again, I'm also telling both sides of the story. So that's been a challenge in terms of the screenwriting. But I think for me, it's like, going back to your visit to my high school back in the 90s, it was, having somebody talk very lucidly about their experience, and it being such, I wasn't in college at the time, but you're like, oh, and I saw this guy and he was cute and he asked me out, and just how relatable that is for any kind of teenage girl, and then just thinking like, oh no, it can happen that easily, right? So that was kind of, it was in the back of my mind, obviously, because I'm like 47 now and I'm still remember this visit from like 30 years ago. But like I, remembered that, and then still, went through another like 12 years of my life, or however 12, 13 years of my life before my own assault. But then when it did happen to me, I was like, God, what just happened? So after my assailant left, and again, even that was really weird, the aftermath, he's still like chatting to me as if we'd had consensual sex, as I'm putting like my mud spattered clothes back on in the middle of the forest. And so he was chatting to me. And I'm still thinking, like, I just need to get this kid away from here, right? But I don't want to turn my back on him because he might try to be violent again and, like, push me down the slope. So I was just trying to placate him and talk to him as if we sort of were okay with what had happened, right? So it was just kind of, almost an act of deception on my end, where I felt at the time that I'm just letting this kid think I'm okay with this because I want him to just leave the scene. And eventually, but then I also didn't want to engage him too much because I didn't want him around, right? So eventually he got bored and he left, right? And so at that moment, like when I was sure he was gone, I was like, okay, what do I just do? Like, I don't even know what the hell just happened. I just came out to do this hike, and then this bizarre thing just happened. And so there was a very clear like decision in my mind then, where it was like, okay, I can keep on walking because I came out here to do this hike, and I'm a hiker, and I hike my 10 miles, and I don't want this kid stealing that like experience from me, even though what just happened was really weird. Or let's think about what just happened. Like, maybe I need medical attention, right? Because this kid punched me in the head, and like, we had unprotected sex, and like, I don't, maybe I should just not do like today and call a friend for help, right? And so I still wasn't really thinking the word rape, but like, stories like yours and stories of, how unexpectedly these things can happen, were running through my mind. So I decided obviously to call a friend for help, right? So I think if I'd chosen the first one and just kept walking, I think my mind would just not pushed it down, but I would have just been like, I'm on this hike, and by the time I finished the hike, I might have just tried to pretend like everything was normal, right? Which I know many victims and survivors have tried to do that. And obviously, things weren't normal anymore after that, and I would have really kind of struggled in my recovery. As it is, obviously, I still struggled in my recovery, but I wasn't at least trying to pretend that things were normal. So I called a friend. So I like veered off the path, and I was like, I'm going to walk to that busy road, and I'm going to call a friend for help. So I called a friend for help, and thank God, as horrible as it sounds, thank God she herself was a victim. I didn't know it at the time, right?
Wow.
But I called my friend Mary Lou, and she was a bit old. I mean, she was there trying to organize some of the events I was attending, so she was a good few decades older than me, and so she had the experience of having been a survivor herself without having even told me, right? She was an older woman who had her own kids, so there was this kind of wisdom that she had. And so I called her, and we were just chatting, and I'm like, oh, she was probably surprised to get the call from me. She's an American woman who was in Belfast for the events, and she's like, yeah, how are you doing? I'm like, yeah, I'm not doing too well. I think I've just been raped, right? So that was the first time I used that word. Obviously, it was the right word. And I was like, am I actually going to use that word? I'm like, that is the most efficient and succinct way of communicating what just happened to me. And if I need help right away, I need to use that word, because that is what happened, right? So it was like I could kind of go through the whole experience and try to explain I went on this walk and this guy approached me and blah, blah, blah. Or I could just say the word rape, because I think that's the word. So I was like, I'm not doing too well. I think I've just been raped. And she was amazing. And she just kind of was like, where are you right now? Are you safe? Like, stay where you are. I'm going to get the police on the line, but I'm going to stay on the line. I'll just call them on the other line, And I actually didn't know where I was, because I had this hiking path, but I didn't know where it was in relation to the city. So I was trying to describe it. She put me on the phone with these Northern Irish cops. I couldn't even understand their accent. I'm trying to describe where I was hiking, and I figured it out where I was, right? Because I walked to a main road, and I'm like, I'm just going to sit at the side of this road and you can just find me, right? And I'd given as much information as I could have provided, and then eventually they did find me. So, and Mary Lou was there. She showed up as well. She was with me throughout the whole process. I went to the forensic exam afterwards. And I had actually a pretty good experience with the police. Not so much with other authorities afterwards, but I mean, the police were actually really good in Northern Ireland. And I know that's different from other people's experiences. But yeah, so, quite quickly I used that word raped, and then I felt like I had to kind of summon the help that I needed, I suppose. And if I was younger, if I wasn't 29 and like a working professional by the time the assault happened, I might not have done that. I might not have acted with as much kind of decisiveness. But I mean, there was certainly a benefit, as much as we want to call it that, to be that age when it happened, as opposed to much younger, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Or at least all the things you'd been through already. I mean, Winnie, the way the adventurous part of your life had taught you a lot, I think. So what is the process like there in Northern Ireland? So the police do an investigation. What happened in that aftermath?
Yeah, I mean, so all the evidence was collected like off my body. That was, this endless like, kind of exam where they were just like probing every single part of my body, and so that was kind of hell. But the doctor she was really lovely. I heard her thank you note afterwards, because she was such a nice doctor and so compassionate. Various things happened. I then had to go to like the hospital. This is all detailed in my book. Like, I had to go to the hospital. They spoke to my friends, and they're like, "Oh, are you the translator?" Because again, like,
oh no, wait.
And I was like, "I speak English fine."
Oh my gosh.
I'm the translator, but outside of the U.S. maybe. So there were all these like kind of like slightly comic things that were happening throughout this whole experience. The nurse, I did not have a good experience at the hospital, not because of that, but because the doctor was like, he was young and male and like obviously read my file, but like didn't know how to address the issue. So he didn't say anything about the sexual assault. He came and looked at me, said, "You've got some bruises on your neck." And then he like left the room, and then the nurse came in with some ibuprofen, and that was it. And we're like, "Wait, you're just giving me ibuprofen?" Like I got punched in the head. I was like choked, and she's like, "Well, the doctor doesn't think you need to be looked at for concussion, and the doctor doesn't think you need it." So I was like, "Okay, this has just happened to me, this thing, right?" And she's like, "I'll go home and have like a wee glass of wine, right?" And my friend and I were like, "Only in Ireland would they say
the cure for everything.
Yeah, so throughout there were all these like blackly comic things that were happening, and those are all in the novel. And it's just this thing about like that is what you kind of have to do to survive, is just to be like, oh, you can find the humor in like this ridiculous situation, right? But yeah, so I obviously like my whole life changed after that, right? So I was in deep shock, right? And and I had PTSD. Agoraphobia, and yet I still went home to London the next day. I missed one of my flights because I had to do the police, another police interview. So I missed a flight again. That broke down crying at the airport because they wouldn't let me onto that flight. And then my friends were like, "You have no idea what this woman's just been through," and they bought me another flight home to London. So I was really lucky to have other friends that were looking out for me. Got home, still got into my ball gown, and went to the premiere of the film. Right. So, and it was this thing where it's like, I worked really hard in this film and this is our first red carpet premiere. I'm not going to let this kid take it away from me. So it was just really surreal experience of like walking down the red carpet for this film, which I'd worked on, and all the stuff, I had to like get all this concealer to cover up my bruises. Right. And just like be like, and in the novel, I obviously kind of heighten it a bit more where it's just kind of like, 12 hours earlier as my bruises were being photographed by the police, and like now I'm trying to cover it up with concealer, right? But having to play this role and like put on this mask and be like, everything's fine, we're celebrating this film, when like my life was falling apart inside. And so I got home, just fell asleep on the couch. I had told my roommates what had happened. I was like, just so you know, like my weekend in Belfast did not go well. I was raped and I have to deal with the aftermath of it now. And then the next morning I got a phone call from the police in London saying, "Oh, can we take some more photographs of your bruises because they're probably darker now that a few days have passed," right? So suddenly my whole life went from like, I'm making films, I'm having this exciting life as a 20-something in London, to like, oh no, yeah, like you're pretty much your mind and your body exist for the police to provide evidence from to find this individual. And he was arrested by, I think, Thursday of that week. So the assault happened on Saturday and he was arrested by Thursday because it was on the news by Saturday afternoon, right? So like hours after it happened, most people in Northern Ireland would have heard about my case if they were listening to the news. But again, the surreality of 2 days after my assault, because this was 2008, so there was still, you could Google stuff and find it. So I was Googling rape West Belfast, and then I listened to an entire radio chat show of people in Northern Ireland talking about this horrible case of this young American woman, or this young Chinese woman. I was described as Chinese in the beginning. This young Chinese woman who's been like brutally raped in a park in West Belfast, right? What does this mean? Is Belfast still a safe city? And so people calling in and talking about it, and my heart goes out to that wee Chinese girl. And so Northern Ireland has its own history of violence, and I think about maybe 4 years to the day maybe where I had been raped in that park, another girl her body had been discovered and she had been assaulted, right? She'd been sexually assaulted and then her body was discovered. And so that was like more media attention, right? And so the mother, grandmother, aunt, a female relative of that young woman who unfortunately passed away, like called in and she said, "My heart goes out to that wee Chinese girl. It just brings back all the memories." But she said, "My heart goes out to that wee Chinese girl because her life is now ruined," right? Which came from a place of empathy, right? Obviously she felt bad for me, right? Who wouldn't feel bad for someone who's violently assaulted and raped in a park? But it was like that statement, hearing it 2 days after my own assault, where I'm like, is my life ruined? Being like, who is this woman who doesn't even know me saying that my life is ruined, right? And so kind of like a sense of outrage about that, not specifically at the woman, because I know she obviously it was coming from a place of empathy,
Yeah.
but just a sense of like, I don't think you could say that to people. Like they might be listening, and just being like, you know what? I'm gonna freaking show all you people that you think that my life is now ruined. So just being like, all these people are talking about my rape. It's really weird to be hearing people talk about it, but nowhere is there any kind of consideration for the fact that like maybe I should be speaking about it, or maybe this person might be listening in on it, or maybe other people listening in have also been raped or will be raped in the future and might get this message. So, just a strong sense of how much the alarm bells ring when you hear about brutal rape like that, but then some of the messaging can be quite damaging, right? And also just not even just damaging for victims, but like other people hearing it and being like, yeah, life's ruined.
Winnie, I'm happy you protest in the way you do. It's just, just for our listeners, you've got to get Winnie's book. And then if you juxtapose a lot of what Winnie's saying with the time, so there I am on the cover. Inside, there's a national poll, Winnie, of Americans. What percentage of people back then thought if the man pays for dinner, he is owed sex? Like, you talk about judgment. She's damaged goods. She deserved it. Like, it's still the same. The narrative is still the same, and it's crazy to me to think also that you're saying so many parallel things that are applying to a stranger situation that, are still being said. But here's, I know we only have like 5 minutes left. So
I mean, we could do part 2 if you want, because this is actually funny.
This is good. I love it. So let's talk about the aftermath and the other 2 books.
Okay.
Part 2. But let's kind of like leave our listeners like understanding. So what we will be talking about on part 2 with Winnie is like there are more books and there's many more years of your life after this. But let's just kind of land on the immediate aftermath. So we have him get arrested on Thursday. We have you go to the premiere and covering up your bruises and start to protest in small, powerful ways, it sounds like, or whatever was possible to
I don't think at the time I didn't really have like the ability to actually like protest, like start taking protest measures. It was just more like mentally, I'm like, this sucks, right? But like, I was just so in shock, and then just my life was like just completely shattered, like the life I knew. And so I had agoraphobia. I couldn't really leave my apartment. I, that kind of the confident, capable, like independent, well-traveled person that I thought I was, I felt I was a ghost of that person, right? Immediately afterwards. So I felt like I gutted and I couldn't do any of that stuff. Now, I probably could still have done some of that stuff, and I was walking through it, but just not enjoying any of it. And so I think maybe if somebody saw me on the outside, they would have thought like, oh, she's fine. But I was like a complete shell of the person that I'd been. And so there was like an inability to find joy in anything, right? And to have any confidence in myself. And so that was the hardest thing. And just being like, I'm just not the person I was before. And I don't know if I'm ever going to get to be that person again. And that's just been gone because of what this person's done to me. And so it was a pretty stark, it was a really rude awakening, because like this is the impact of sexual violence. You just lose the life that you thought you had, and you completely lose your sense of self-identity. So I had to stop working, so I basically gave up my film producing career, despite having gone to that premiere. And like, for a few months after, I still tried to keep producing. I'm like, I can't do this job anymore. And I like didn't have a social life anymore. Like friends would invite me out. I'm like, you don't get it. I can't go out and socialize with friends because I just feel like a complete loser, right? And that summer I was 29, so I was invited to all these weddings. And so I remember still going to some and just having to be like, put the makeup on and just be like, wow, what am I doing talking to people? Like, what am I doing like at this wedding trying to celebrate like friends meeting the love of their lives? Like, I'm never going to meet the love of my life because like my life sucks, right? So just kind of like it was really tough, right? And maybe because I'd been doing so much stuff prior to that, right? And so suddenly to be like reduced to a shell of the person that I was, was, through no fault of my own. And just to be like, this is how drastically that change can happen, was tough. And I didn't tell my parents. I told my friends, and I told, in a weird way, I like wrote an email to my friends, like everybody I considered dear to me. I'm like, just so you know, guys, this happened. Like, I don't want to have to tell this over the phone to 20 of you, like individually. It's like, this is the email. I'm like, so part of me was like, what's the most efficient way to get my story communicated and to like get the help I need from friends? It was like, I'm going to send an email, right? This is what happened. All right. So, you know, if you want to help out, that's great, you know, kind of thing. Right. And some friends were great. Friends were amazing. They came over, they cooked dinner for me, this kind of that. Other friends, not so amazing because they just didn't know what to write back. So mainly the men, would take like 4 weeks to write back. But, you know, I mean, everyone was nice about it. Right. And then a lot of people started sharing their stories about either the time they'd been raped, and again, I'd known them for years, we never spoke about it,
Wow.
or the time their aunt had been raped, or near misses that they had. So it was kind of in some ways me being that open about what happened to me kind of opened up the floodgates for other people sharing their stories. And so that's kind of when I realized, like, oh, this is a really prevalent experience, and why have we never spoken about these things before? So yeah, so that kind of also laid the seeds for my activism.
Which we're going to get to in episode 2, in part 2. So I think we just leave everyone knowing that we're going to come back to where we left off. And, you know, just as people anticipate the second half, is there anything you want to, you know, other than starting in on the book, we'll give them time to get a copy, right, and start reading. But is there anything else you want to share, just as encouragement to any of the survivors hearing your story and like just clicking with you for so many moments?
Yeah, well, I think it was because where I've left you in the story so far is just like, you know, I'm 29, I'm having to go to like weddings of friends, you know, and I've just been raped, and just thinking like, I'm never going to have that life. Like, I'm never, like, they're on this other plane. It's like, suddenly I ended up on this like alternate like universe where like I'm a rape victim and everybody else's life is going on fine and their careers are flourishing and they're getting married. And I'm like, that's never going to happen to me. Right. Like, and so this sense of like, I don't know if I'm ever going to get to like do all the things I want to do, like write a book or have a child or travel again. And so at 29, I'm like, that's never going to happen. And then, you know, it did, obviously, right? I'm 47 now, and I published 3 books, and I have a career, and like, you know, I'm, you know, in a relationship, and, you know, I have a kid. And so and I've done lots of traveling since then. So, but that sense of like, it's impossible. And then gradually over the years, like learning that like, no, it's not impossible. You can start to reclaim those parts of yourselves, like, is definitely possible. So just the encouragement of knowing you can still have the life you want to have.
Yeah, and then we'll get to learn all your best hacks for this. I don't know what else to call them. Hacks. I would call them hacks. They're just processing techniques that most people probably don't think about, and I'm sure there's many that are unique and special to you, Winnie. So I can't wait for part 2. And for our listeners, just, you know, we'll try and drop them maybe 2 or 3 weeks apart so you can go start reading up on Winnie's amazing writing skills as well. But until the next episode, please, you know, take always that great moment of self-care. I think when the stress feels like heavy, don't do any self-harm stuff. Just turn that stressful moment out into the fresh air or into a hot cup of tea, coffee. Chocolate bars are a good trick. Whatever works, you know. But and if you're feeling feisty and strong and you know, I think do whatever it is that feels empowering, which I know we're going to hear a lot more from Winnie in the next episode. So until then, be well, and we are together, survivors and thrivers. Take care.
Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Dear Katie. These conversations are never easy, but they're always necessary, and we're so grateful you chose to share this space with us. If something in today's episode stirred something within you, please give yourself what you need. Whether that's rest, support, or just a deep breath, you're not alone. To hear more stories, resources, and survivor-centered conversations, be sure to subscribe and follow us on your favorite podcast platform. We want to hear from you, so please leave us a review and share your feedback. Your thoughts help us create episodes that resonate with listeners. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.